never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Neff Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stephan Neff. Today, we've got an amazing interview waiting, and it is going to be an interview that will probably be quite shocking for many of you out there. The reason is we are talking about human trafficking. That's normally something you think about, maybe pirates in the past or the slaves in 200 years ago. When in reality, nowadays, this is probably one of the worst times for human trafficking because the world is in such an upheaval. It makes it so easy for all kinds of reasons to treat humans in a way they should never be treated. And I've got Jennisue Jessen with me. Jennisue is a woman who has made it her mission to talk about it. She is the CEO of Compass 31, an international anti-human trafficking agency. She has been the advisor to Donald Trump and Joe Biden with regards to human trafficking. Who better to have on this beautiful show than Jennisue? Welcome to my show.
I am so excited to share time with you and your listeners today. I think we're going to have a really dynamic and impactful conversation.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing. I think most of us are still living in Lulu-La-La land. What are the figures nowadays in 2024 with regards to human trafficking? And let's say specifically in the United States. The reason I say that is it is always difficult in active war zones to get an active measure on that. So God knows what is happening in Ukraine and Russia. God knows what is happening in Venezuela or other absolute Haiti. There's so many places where we just don't get data. But what about in good old safe United States?
You know, you're jumping right into one of these myths or things that we hold onto in American culture is that bad things only happen somewhere over there, somewhere outside of my home. And the reality is trafficking is happening. It is happening over there, out there in every country in the world. And it's also happening right here at home. It's in every state. It's in every city. It's in every neighborhood. And lest people think that it's not happening in the US, I would challenge them to look at their browser history to see how many trafficked men, women, boys, or girls are in their search history on pornographic sites. So it is nearly impossible to get accurate statistics for a number of reasons. Trafficking is underreported. Often trafficking is initiated by a family member or a trusted friend. And so the individual being exploited or trafficked for many years doesn't identify as a trafficking victim. They have been in love with this person, or this is my grandfather, which was my case. And I got in the car. I went. I love this person. He just needs to pay off his debt and then it'll be done. And so they don't identify as a victim of anything. So numbers are really, really hard to track down. But we do know that trafficking is more than $150 billion industry. And so it is big money because it's highly profitable. And again, it's happening in every area of our towns, our neighborhoods, our cities, our states.
And you have already addressed another myth because we think of traffickers as, I don't know, whatever kind of prejudice you have got that sort of rob you in the darkness of a park. And next thing you find yourself somewhere in horrible circumstances. And that is not really the case. It is, there's often a trust relationship there that is seriously broken.
Right. Yeah, at least 76% of individuals who are trafficked are initially trafficked by a family member or a trusted friend. 76%. And so trafficking does happen by means of force, fraud, or coercion. And so force is what you're describing. We kind of have this Hollywood image of the kidnapping and Liam Neeson coming and kicking down doors and dragging his daughter out from under a bed. And kidnapping and force does absolutely happen, but it's by far the minority. And here's why. Because if a kidnapper goes into a neighborhood in the US or overseas and takes a man, a woman, a child that belongs to a connected, loving family, then the whole neighborhood is going to turn out searching for this person that's missing, right? There's going to be wanted posters or missing kid posters. It's going to be on social media. The police are going to get involved. And that creates significant risk for the traffickers. And so it's far easier, if you will, and more profitable. And I don't want to make a playbook for traffickers, but it is easier and more profitable for them to win an individual's trust. And from that place, then move them to a place of exploitation. A woman, meets a guy online, or a child meets a person online that they think is, a 14-year-old kid from the next school over. And in a matter of weeks, this 14-year-old who's actually, a 57-year-old pedophile convinces them, hey, meet me at the mall. We're going to hang out and go to the arcade. And that child disappears. But from the outside looking in, it looks like this child has run away. And so the way that the law enforcement gets involved, the way the community gets involved is a totally different dynamic than kidnapping. There's coercion and fraudulent offers, like a job offer or we have a soccer scholarship, we have a modeling contract, and so these individuals willingly go, or their parents willingly send them, thinking it is a good, viable opportunity, when in fact it's a fraudulent offer. And again, many of those people don't identify as victims of human trafficking because they believed this was a real offer. And I signed a contract and I got on a plane and I came. So that's on me, which is a reality that many individuals experiencing trafficking live in.
And coming from Germany, I mean, this is the classical scenario after the wall came down, after basically the whole poorer Eastern Bloc nations. Young women were left and right exploited in this way. Oh, my goodness. Having said that, there are so many nuances in there to actually just imagine them all into that one, somehow draw, putting them in there makes it really, really difficult. But I guess the one thing that then makes it so much more difficult is, of course, the shame and the guilt. You have already said that young women who are now finding themselves in prostitution in somewhere in a European or American state, they have often signed a contract. They often have the responsibility of bringing money to a much impoverished home. Let that be in the former Eastern Bloc, or let it be somewhere in South America or Asia. So there is that, the duty to provide, and there's of course the shame. Who will admit to being in this situation? No surprise that the underreporting must be huge. Do you have any guesses or guesstimates from the numbers to the real numbers?
I don't, other than it's wildly underreported, because the different people that are reporting are measuring different things. We have like trafficking, we have child trafficking, we have sexual exploitation. If you were doing a Venn diagram, you have all these different buckets and there's an intersection, but which one are we talking about? And we not only have sex trafficking, but we have labor trafficking, which is prolific across the US, as many other countries. And there's a growing demand for organ trafficking, actually.
Mm.
And it's a scary, scary world out there. Trafficking is happening all around us, but to quantify it, I don't know which numbers are the most reliable, and they're always changing.
Mm.
So I can't give you a good answer on that. I can tell you though, you mentioned Germany, being from Germany, and that's an interesting case study since they have completely decriminalized prostitution. And the argument has been that if it's decriminalized, there will be much greater protections for the prostituted individuals, that they'll have, protection of the government. They can call the police if they need to. It will be destigmatized, not just decriminalized, but there will be no stigma attached to it. And those are really interesting arguments. But what we find statistically, and I would have to get into my reports to pull out those numbers. We could maybe put it in show notes if you're interested. But what we see is a really dramatic increase in trafficking in places where prostitution is decriminalized. And here's why. Because while you may argue, not you particularly, but while an individual may argue that the prostituted person is doing it consensually, they like sex, it's good money, it's good time, it's all good. And that may be a valid argument for very few of those being exploited in sex work. However, there's not enough women, certainly not enough children, willing to give their consent to be used in that way. So when it's decriminalized and now there's no longer penalty, the demand increases exponentially. And when the demand increases and there's not enough people consensually meeting that demand, traffickers step in and fill the gap. So it's a really curious thing to watch over the last several years as that has been happening in Germany, and certainly in pockets in the US around Las Vegas. There's counties that prostitution is decriminalized, and in those places, the demand increases, but there's not enough willing individuals to meet the demand. And so trafficking increases.
Okay, I didn't see that coming, but now that you explain it like that, it actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. From your experience, is human trafficking more a problem of lower socioeconomic classes, or does it really transcend the whole strata of society?
What an amazing question. I'm so glad you asked that. Actually, it is across the whole spectrum of socioeconomic status and culture and education. What we do find is that a large percentage of the buyers are middle class or upper middle class men who are married with children. And these individuals are in a place that they have some finances to spare, right? So the individuals that are buying are typically upper middle class. They are often individuals with a measure of power, because they can be a doctor, they can be a lawyer, they can be a judge, they can be in law enforcement, but because they have money and because they have power, they can continue to commit these crimes with impunity. They're not going to be found out. But the individuals trafficked span the whole spectrum. I was trafficked by my grandfather, but my grandfather was a wealthy guy. He was the big fish in a small pond in nowhere, Missouri, the middle of the US, the Midwest. For kindergarten, I got a fur coat and a color TV of my own when I was 5 for Christmas.
Okay.
And still I was being exploited. So it can be driven by poverty. Absolutely. It is always driven by money, whether the individual being exploited is impoverished, or in this modern day and age, what we're seeing right now is a lot of young women in university who are unable to pay their tuition are on OnlyFans, they're on Backpage, they are signing up to be sugar babies and to pay for school. So it's this exchange, right? But contributes to a fundamental breakdown. Because I would argue that in the case of prostitution, or euphemistically called sex work, I would argue it's neither sex nor work. But the individual being prostituted, you aren't actually, the buyer is paying for her to waive her consent. Here's what I mean. Would she be having sex with this man if she wasn't being paid? If the answer is no, then he's not paying her for sex. He's paying her to waive her consent. And when she accepts the money, that means she's going to do whatever he requires, like it or not. She's going to do the thing because he's paid her to do the thing. And so when we look at it from that perspective, if he's paying her to waive her consent and everything that happens after this exchange of money is happening because I no longer can consent, then that's sexual assault. That's rape for profit. So it's a really curious dynamic. I can see your mind working. You can argue
absolutely.
with me. I'm not allergic
No. It is
to conflict.
No, honestly, it is so hard. And I have had feminists exactly using the same argument that a marriage is ultimately the same thing. The moment you've got a ring on your fingers, you waive your consent. Your husband, in some cultures, has got all the rights, whatever he wishes to. So this is not an unknown argument for me. It is hard for me to imagine this complete lack of free will, to now say all these poor women and men and transgender. I mean, it does not only affect women; it affects men.
Right. It's across the spectrum.
Exactly.
And those that are non-binary or gender non-conforming, it is across the spectrum.
I've lived in Berlin, where there is a large gay community, and many of my friends were gay, and they were very, very happy, promiscuous, and from now and then also took money. This was a very, very open thing for them. So I've seen a side of society that actually had a bloody good time in going out there and exploring their sexuality. Let's call it like that, and making some money whilst they were at it. So I've seen that side, and I'm sure that on OnlyFans, etc., there are some of these that the same thing is happening there too. It's that the hard thing is to actually that in between, that the gray zone. I mean, the clear black zone. I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, that's easy. But what about this gray zone? And I mean, is there any case law that has attempted to protect women or humans? Let's call it humans because it's human trafficking. I love it. So therefore, is there case law that has tried to protect humans in such a way with that argument?
There are in the vast majority of the US, prostitution is still illegal.
Right.
And why is it illegal? Because the correlation being you're paying for another human, you're objectifying this human, and this human is worthy of dignity and respect and autonomy, and you can't buy humans. The 13th Amendment, we've abolished slavery, equal rights, but there is this niggling remaining space that we justify or think it's defensible for individuals with money and power to pay to use individuals without money or without power. And when we have that dynamic of objectification, we're no longer having a human to human interaction.
Mm.
We're having a human to an object interaction.
Mm.
And we're having a person with demands and a person who's waived their consent
Mm.
meeting the demands.
Mm.
So yes, like you spoke of your friends, I spend a lot of time in red light districts interacting with individuals who have been or are
Mm.
currently
Mm.
being exploited. I love them. I have some really
Mm.
dear friendships in those
Mm.
spaces. And I teach on something that I call the spectrum of empowerment. And that is this idea that, well, we know statistically that individuals who are in sex work
Mm.
say they're there, say that we assume they're there consensually. But if we interview and do statistics on individuals in prostitution or being prostituted, somewhere between 60 and 95% of them have a history of childhood sexual assault.
Mm. Of course. Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have this like core driver. Yes,
Yeah.
maybe they're there consensually, but what made them think that this is where their value lies?
That's a beautiful argument.
How did they
100%. Yeah.
how did they learn that
Mm.
when they were 5 years old, were they dreaming of standing on a street corner and
Touche.
servicing
Touche.
this smelly, sweaty old man?
Beautiful.
Or were they dreaming of being a doctor or a lawyer or a judge?
Beautifully
What
said.
made them believe
Exactly.
that this was the best option for them? I don't
Mm.
think anybody ever, as a child, dreams
Mm.
of spending their life
Mm.
on their knees.
Wonderfully said. Because there is so much more to a behavior or to a trait or to something that is deemed normal for a person, and then meets the eye, the core beliefs, the warped upbringing,
Right.
the aces. You're so right.
Right.
My goodness. I mean,
It's
you
a very
have.
complex issue. And I have deep compassion
Mm.
on all sides of the spectrum. Even, like I said, I spend a lot of time in red light districts, and I'll never forget being down in a red light district in Southeast Asia one night. And that particular night, I was mad because I had seen one of these girls that I love. One of my friends was in an interaction with a buyer, and he hit her, and it made me mad, and I was powerless to intervene in the moment. And so I was stomping through the red light district, mad. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw this older man in this bar brothel negotiating for his evening. And I was overwhelmed with this sense of compassion. Like, this was an old guy who was just lonely.
Mm.
He was just profoundly lonely. And I like wanted to go up to this guy and go, "Why are you here? Like, where's your family? Where's your kids? Like, where's your grandbabies? You are worth more than this. I know she is worth more than this. What you're looking for, you can't buy with money. It's not here. This is not what you're looking for." So I have tremendous compassion. And then there's certainly individuals, there's traffickers, there's pimps, there's buyers who are absolutely just bent on destruction. They are there to see how much pain and how much devastation they can create. I have very little compassion for those. Just, that's my humanness. I survived 14 years of exploitation from the ages of 4 to 17. So it's really hard for me to have compassion for those that are set on destruction. But for a lot of the buyers, they justify their actions like, she's poor, her family's poor, I'm paying, she's going to feed her family, I'm having a good time, she's having a good time. That's what they're telling themselves to justify this interaction. But every time we objectify and use another person, whether it's in person or on a screen, it creates further and further social disconnect. And we're made for relationship. So it's actually moving us further away from that thing that we're trying so hard to get.
Oh, there are so many points, so many nuggets you've just dropped there. it is, I don't know where to go now because I want to go in immediately in 5 different directions.
Just pick one,
Yeah, that's right.
or we can
No.
completely change direction.
No. This is far too valuable, these lessons that I'm learning here. Because if I'm learning these lessons and getting these insights, also the people out there will think, huh, I hadn't thought about that. And therefore,
Yeah.
it is so wonderful. I mean, you have had the mission in your life to first heal yourself and then go out there and actually help others to become more empowered to
Mhm.
be aware of their rights, and in some cases to actually literally leave the trade, get out as much as possible. Now, you have first become the CEO of Compass 31, and you have also been the advisor to at the end stage of Donald Trump's time as a president, and now with Joe Biden. If we were to look at the more recent advisory status, what were your greatest insights from being in that position?
It was an incredible opportunity for me, and I'll answer from my heart because that's
Mm,
what I feel coming forward right now. When you ask me that question, it was a stunning honor to be appointed by President Trump. He
mm,
appointed me at the very end of his term, and I was sworn in right just after President Biden was sworn in. So I served my 2 years under Biden, kind of straddling these two administrations. But one of the greatest gifts that I got from that is, as a child living in exploitation, incredible violence, I learned that my survival was dependent on my submission and my silence. And and I learned that lesson very well in many brutal ways. So as an adult, to be appointed by the President of the United States of America to sit on a council, the U.S. Advisory Council. I was a part of a cohort of 11 survivor leaders. And our job was to regularly meet with the senior policy advisors to the president's cabinet and investigate what we are doing on a federal level to combat trafficking and help inform more effective counter-trafficking strategies.
mm.
So to come from this place of my survival depended on silence and submission and be elevated to going toe to toe day after day with the high officials in the Department of Justice and Homeland Security
Right.
and Health and Human Services, to use my voice and influence federal counter-trafficking policy
Yeah.
was such a tremendous gift. And I also had the opportunity to explore why I'm passionate about what I'm passionate about. I argued hard against the decriminalization of prostitution. I argued hard against or hard for implementation or prosecution of our obscenity laws because, again, going back to pornography, is the marketing department for trafficking. They're intrinsically linked.
I like it, the
And
marketing department. I had not thought about it like that.
they're the marketing department. And so to have a voice, to be able to stand up often to men who are in power and draw a line in the sand and say, no, this is not okay.
Mm,
And that they were obligated to listen. Now,
mm,
they haven't implemented everything that I fought for. There's been incremental changes, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful that I had that platform for my 2-year term. But the greater thing was the proof that I don't have to be silent. I don't have to be submissive. In fact, I can use my story. I can use my experience. I can use my voice, and I can influence policy in a way that impacts the next generation. of individuals who are being exploited.
Beautiful. Having said that, I mean, we see tremendous upheaval around the world, but also very close to your home. The and I'm not sure what to believe, because there are so many stories coming from your southern border with regards to human trafficking, with regards to illegal immigrants. Is that not a huge influx of potential material? Let it be for human trafficking for whatever reason. Let's say employment, as well as sex.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a great point to differentiate for your listeners. They may or may not be aware that there's a difference between human smuggling and human trafficking. So human smuggling is, I'm in one country and I desperately need to go to this other country because of persecution, because of danger, because of a job opportunity, because of illness. I need to get from point A to point B, but I don't have the resources or the documentation to enter into this country. So I'm going to pay a smuggler to get me from point A to point B. That's human smuggling. Human trafficking, on the other hand, is one person by means of force, fraud, or coercion, forcing an individual to perform labor or sex for profit, for their own profit. But there's this tremendous intersection, and that's what we see happening at our southern border. Is there's an enormous influx of individuals that are coming. We have some really astounding numbers. I haven't looked at the numbers in the last couple of months because it makes my head want to explode. But the numbers that we have, it's important to note, are only those that are being documented coming through legal checkpoints. But we have miles and miles and miles of border that aren't legal checkpoints. So if you're a smuggler bringing somebody into the US illegally, are you going to come through a legal checkpoint? Likely not, right? You're going to come through the hundreds of miles that there are not border officials. So those people are coming in, smuggled in, and often the smugglers are working in sync with traffickers. So the individual gets to the US, they don't know their legal protection, their rights. They often their first encounter will be with somebody who looks like law enforcement or looks like border patrol. They may or may not be. They will be violently assaulted by this person. And so now these people coming in, they're without their ID because the smuggler kept it.
Yeah.
The smuggler saying, you owe me, you already paid me $3,000, but actually it's $17,000. So you need to go with my brother, Joe, who's the trafficker, and work it off. And so it's this mess. If it's a Venn diagram, there's this huge intersection, overlap of the two. But yes, it's happening at our southern border, and those people coming in, there are an enormous amount of unaccompanied minors. These are children that are not with any biological relative. And what's happening, what we're finding is there's these campaigns in Central and South America, throughout Mexico, that are telling people if your kid gets into the US, then the US government will bring you as the parent into the US to be with them. Now, this is not actually legally true, but that's the campaign. And so parents are paying a smuggler to take their kid, and then their kid disappears into the US. And they're unaccompanied and they're undocumented and they have no ID and no protection. So it has increased astronomically in the last several years. And it makes my head want to explode. And it happens in different places. I have partners that have been working on the border of Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict there. And one of the really curious things is, and this is a pretty normal thing, You have refugees fleeing the war front, right? And they want to cross over into Poland, for example. Well, they're met at the border by individuals. There's like 4 buses lined up of Red Cross or World Aid, some kind of aid. And of these 4 buses, 3 of them are legitimate. But one bus looks the same and is dressed the same and comes up to these families who have been for days, weeks, months on foot fleeing war. And imagine you've got a whole family unit, a dad, a mom, a couple of kids, and this individual with their Red Cross vest comes up, their clipboard. They're like, our bus is leaving. We've got you. Give us your ID. We will get you in a shelter. We'll help you get connected to the resources you need. And the family gets on the bus. And again, 3 out of 4 buses are legitimate and 1 is not. And what we found there, so this might blow your mind, but before the conflict in Ukraine started, organ trafficking, for example, a kidney on the black market cost around $250,000. With the trafficking that's happening among the refugees on the border fleeing the conflict, now a kidney on the black market costs $25,000. What's that tell you about the economics of supply and demand? Right? So this 4th bus, the one with the traffickers, takes a whole family. Well, the man, can he be sold for labor? Yes. The wife, can she be sold for labor, organs, sex? The children, can they labor? Less likely. Sex, probably the most profitable. Teenage boys are really, really high candidates for organ trafficking because they don't submit well. they don't submit easily to being exploited in sex. And because, those teenage boys, they've got all the hormones and all the bravado of being caught between boy and man. And a normal, healthy teenager in a normal environment, they've got all that going on. So you put them in that environment. Teenage boys are more likely to be trafficked for organs because they don't submit well to labor trafficking or sex trafficking. It's not that they aren't trafficked for those. They are, absolutely. But I'm just talking about this specific Ukrainian, situation. If you have a whole family that gets on the bus, you're going to utilize every portion that is profitable of those individuals.
Oh, that makes me sick. Literally sick. And it blows my mind, absolutely blows my mind. I was aware that certainly in China, or in Asia, there was a rampant trade going. But I was still, maybe that is me being naive now, thinking, yeah, that's over there. That is still an isolated kind of case. With prison.
But think for just a moment about the infrastructure that is required for organ trafficking specifically, right? You have a medical background. You have to have a surgeon, a capable surgeon. You have to have a space that is sterile. You have to have the capacity to transport the organ from point A to point B. On the implant side or the transplant side, the receiver, you have to have the surgeon, you have to have the anesthetist, you have to have the nurses, you have to have the medicines, you have to have the facility, all of that in place to facilitate this. And so it's easier to look at those pieces when we're thinking the medical field, but the same thing is happening with sex trafficking and labor trafficking. You have to have, trafficking does not happen in a vacuum. It's not one bad guy exploiting these 6 kids. It happens because systems are facilitating it because it's highly profitable. And within those systems, there's amazing individuals that work in Border Patrol and immigration that are fierce and brave and noble and doing beautiful things. And then there's some that are wicked. There's lawyers that are passionate and fighting for justice, and there's lawyers that are wicked, there's judges, there's law enforcement, there's doctors, there's nurses that are noble and passionate and helping humanity rise. And in all of those professions, in the church, in all of those professions, there's good people and there's wolves in sheep's clothing. We want to think that traffickers are this like monster that lives under the bed, but the perpetrators look just like you and me. And in fact, what's really, really stingy, if you want to be really stingy, is that all of it is driven by our own greed and lust. It's driven by the consumer demand. We want cheap products, we want cheap labor, and we want cheap sex. And if there was not a demand, there wouldn't be a need to meet the demand.
How it's a very good approach, though. I mean, to actually say, hang on, there are systems in place, and we are all talking about money. Is that not the way forward? Trace the money, trace the flow of the money to actually see where the problems are. Is this not a way forward? Nowadays, there is so much. I mean, Big Brother is watching you, for crying out loud. Let's not be silly here. There are systems in place to give me all kind of information. Let's say advertisement. You know, if I say something to a friend, but 6 hours later I get advertisement coming through Facebook. So come on, if that is the case,
it's creepy, right?
Absolutely. So can we not use the same systems to actually hunt down the money and the perpetrators?
Yes. And absolutely. One of the things when I was on the U.S. Advisory Council was we were meeting with the heads of the Department of Commerce, making that argument. Let's track the money. Let's trace the money. Where's it going? Where's it coming from? There's been some really significant lawsuits against banks that were working alongside Jeffrey Epstein. And I think JP Morgan recently paid out $220 million in settlement for survivors of the Epstein ring.
Wow.
So that is an important piece, certainly tracking the money. And also, the creepiness of being listened to and the ads that you get on your computer. And how does that happen? It's annoying and it's frustrating and it's a little bit scary, but also there's the whole dark web of cryptocurrency and people doing things on the down low. And that's harder to track. But I also have some friends that are what we call white hats. You know, they're hackers, that's what they do. They set up kind of stings. They go in the dark web. They bait these traffickers. They bait the pedophiles and track their IP, give enough evidence to local law enforcement, either of child sex abuse material or violence or exploitation, to have that person arrested. So I think to successfully intervene in trafficking, there's three pieces. There's the top down. We need like government, federal policies. We need laws that will be implemented and will be enforced. Top down. Bottom up. Individuals, concerned citizens, just your average Joe needs to know what's happening and know how our demands are creating this market for people to be exploited. What's my responsibility in it? Whether it's coffee beans or chocolate or paying for sex, what's my role in propagating this system? But then the third piece is that we have to address the woundedness of humanity that makes this a viable option. So a healthy, happy, self-actualized man has no need or desire to pay for sex because he has deeply fulfilling relationships, right? A woman who is beautiful and educated and empowered and has a career, has no desire to sell herself for sex. So what is the woundedness that allows us to medicate ourselves by using another person? And when we address that woundedness, because that woundedness, it drives all of our behaviors that are not beneficial. Whatever method we choose for self-medication, whether it's drugs or alcohol or food or sex, we're self-medicating a wound. And if we can address the wound, we end the demand. And that leaves the top down, the law enforcement, with their hands in their pockets. There's nothing to pursue or prosecute because it has is coming to an end. So I favor the term of disrupting trafficking. I don't think we're going to end it as long as there's humans on the planet. We want what we want when we want it, but we can disrupt it for sure.
Jennisue, and I think that is the key, isn't it? But it is, if you look at it from a more mental health point of view, the chance of you being chemically addicted is about 1 in 3, 1 in 4. That shows you that there are a lot of people self-medicating, and it's typically for trauma. So the amount of trauma that is in our society is huge. And unfortunately, those kind of maybe more supportive structures that we have seen in the past, bit more regularly, they are falling apart or have already gone. So it is difficult. Luckily, we are nowadays thinking more about spirituality, and it is becoming more normal to seek actually help, to seek a counselor, to speak with someone. But that is for sure sometimes preaching to the choir, because there's the group of self-improvement, and they're probably not the guys who are actually, going out there and soliciting a prostitute or employing a laborer for I don't know 23 hours a day for $2.50. I think how do we reach those parts of society that feel they can get away with it? Because it's easy to address the others. How do we address those whose moral compass is completely askew? Those people who are who actually might not even be aware of it because they are so naive and innocent and in their own little world.
Yeah. Wow.
If this was an easy question, I don't think I would have asked it. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. I've never been asked this question. And so I'm really thinking, I think here's how I live my life, Stephan, is I live my life waking people up.
Exactly. Yep.
Waking people up. We as a society, especially Western cultures, but really it's fairly global, are so busy, what I call scurrying and scrolling. Either I'm hurrying from point A to point B. I'm like, I get in the car, got to get the kids to school, got to pick the kids up from, got to get to the grocery store, I got to get to work, I got to go to this meeting, I've got soccer practice, I've got the doctor's appointment. I'm scurrying. Or when I'm not doing that, say I made it to my kids' soccer practice, what do? I sit down, and instead of watching soccer practice, I'm scrolling through my phone. I'm sitting in the doctor's office, I'm scrolling through my phone. I'm waiting in the checkout line at the grocery store, I'm scrolling through my phone. So I'm scurrying and scrolling. And I think that if we would take a moment and take a deep breath and wake up and see the person in front of us, we would see that there's trauma all around us. That if you have kids and they have a birthday party and you've got 12 kids sitting around your table singing happy birthday, you could count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
These 4 kids are likely to experience sexual assault before they're 18.
Mm,
And you have the opportunity to, I see you.
mm,
I hear
mm,
you. If you need me, how can I
mm,
love and serve you today?
mm,
But even, the birthday party scenario, what's the mom and dad doing? They're scurrying or scrolling. They're either rushing to, okay, now we're going to do pin the tail on the donkey. Now we're going to cut the cake. Now we're going to open presents.
mm.
They're not being fully present. They're not
Nope.
seeing the people in front of them. And so how do we, back to your question, that was a long rabbit trail, but back to your question, you're asking, how do we impact the ones that don't know they're doing anything wrong,
Yep.
or they are happy to get away with it? And I would say that when they recognize this individual that they're using as an object is this beautiful, fearsome,
Mm,
powerful human, full of emotion and potential, we can't victimize people that we see as humans. Like
mm,
that's a survival strategy. If
mm,
somebody's in a hostage situation, you try to get your captor to say your name. You start
mm,
telling them about your family at home,
mm, mm,
because if they humanize you, it's much harder to perpetrate a crime.
mm,
And so my default mode where I live in life day in, day out is trying to wake people up.
mm,
Stop scurrying, scrolling, see the person in front of you, because I
mm,
think that's really where we disrupt trafficking. And it doesn't matter where the perpetrator is on the spectrum. If he is always objectifying
mm,
this individual instead of seeing their humanity,
mm,
but I can wake them up to recognize, oh no, she has
mm,
so much power.
mm,
She has so much courage, so much strength, so much potential,
mm.
then he wouldn't be able to perpetrate a crime against her.
I love that. I love that. And ultimately, that is, I think, what we see in mental health, in many other aspects of society. The opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of mental health problems is connection. It is
Right.
for us to actually go out there and stop having artificial interfaces and actually having real discussions, and even more important, real discussions that matter. That is a beautiful, beautiful start of us becoming the new humans that we're supposed to become.
Yeah.
I believe we are at a time in the development of humans where we are ready to be catapulted into a new area of enlightenment, of an area where we all are growing and where we all are being more connected. Yet,
Mm-hmm.
in order to get there, it seems to be that we have to get through a hell of a lot of trials and tribulations in order
We do.
to achieve that. But
And we have to be willing to enter into this messy humanity. It's
mm,
safe. It's easy to stay behind a screen
touche,
and to be disconnected.
touche.
And yet we long desperately for
Mm,
that connection. So I often say something very similar to what you just said, and that is that trauma, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in the context of relationship.
mm,
It's between two or more
mm,
individuals that this trauma happens. And the antidote is also in relationship. Healing does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in community. It happens through
true,
connection.
true.
And so to facilitate those connections, like I said, to stop scurrying and scrolling, I have a motto that pops up on my phone every day that reminds me to slow down to the speed of love,
Ooh, nice.
which means I'm going to put my phone away and I'm going to see the person in front of me. And it doesn't matter how many emails are in my inbox. It doesn't matter how many things are on my to-do list. I'm going to
Oh,
slow down to the speed
beautiful,
of love, because
beautiful.
then we can recognize that every human I meet has inherent value and potential. And that's
I
where
love it.
transformation happens.
I love that. Oh, what a beautiful. I mean, how better could you end the show than with slow down to the speed of love? I love it. I
Right.
have to
That
steal that, Jennisue. I'm sorry. That is
please,
too
please
good.
do. I hope your listeners steal it as well.
Well,
Let's do
exactly.
that. Let's do that. Let's slow
Oh,
down to the speed
beautiful.
of love and watch how our culture shifts and
Wow.
changes in response to that. All boats rise with the tide, right?
Touche.
Let's do that.
Jennisue, if people want to know more about you and more importantly about Compass 31 and how they can either learn more about human trafficking or indeed get involved and do their own part, where can they find you?
Thank you so much. I am online everywhere you can look. Jennisue Jessen, compass31.org. You can contact me through the website. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Compass 31. We have our own, presence in social media. I'm on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out to me. And when I have time and capacity, I would love to have conversations about how to get involved in counter trafficking and healing. I'm in the process of getting ready to release a new series and corresponding book called The Art of Healing, which talks a lot about many of these things that we've discussed. So they should look me up, compass31.org or Jennisue Jessen.
Have a look down there, guys, into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast. You see all of her links down there. Please check her out. It's such an amazing and valuable work that Jennisue is involved in. And it takes more than just her with her passion and her fierce determination. It takes a society, it takes the whole culture to change. And we are part of that culture, part of that society. So the more we can all come on board in such a mission, the more we can truly make this world a better place. We have got the power, and we keep forgetting that. So, Jennisue, you're an amazing woman. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show.
Absolutely. It was nice to spend time with you.
Brilliant. And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with intention. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.